Welcome to The Dog's Voice, the podcast where we talk about puppies, their health, and all things dog related. I'm your host, Ben the Vet. This podcast is brought to you by the Dog Breeding Reform Group, where we're working to improve the health and welfare of dogs and support responsible breeding and informed dog care. As this is the very first episode, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Ben Simpson-Vernon. I graduated from Cambridge Vet School in 2015 and have worked in small animal general practice since. And I also make educational content for pet owners, which I post on social media. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Kat the Vet, a fellow member of the Dog Breeding Reform Group, who I'm sure most of you already know from her social media presence. Kat is a staunch advocate for the veterinary profession and a well-respected voice in the media. Like myself, she's also a vet working in small animal practice and has recently set up her own practice in Derbyshire. Today, we'll be chatting about a few topics, including our combined experience of meeting probably thousands, potentially, of new puppies and their families over our careers, and about the role social media plays when it comes to puppy buying. Kat, it's great to have you here. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. It's lovely to be here. One of my favourite topics, talking about puppies.
Yeah, I know something we're both very passionate about. Spend a lot of time talking about online. I was trying to work out that estimate of how many puppies we will have met over the years. How long have you been in practice, Kat?
Well, it's over 20 years now, Ben, actually. So I try not to focus on the numbers. Well, yes, it probably is thousands, isn't it? Because you just don't appreciate the numbers that come through. You know, you see one or two puppies for new vaccines every day in a busy practice.
Yeah.
You know, so every month, you know, that's going to be getting on for 30 maybe more, and then, you know, and
got to be thousands
easily. And so,
and I think especially during COVID, I mean, it was probably, I think, you know, there were days we were seeing 5 or 6 puppies during that period.
It was certainly busy. But when you think that there's a market in the UK for 1 million puppies a year, between us in the vet profession, you know, all of those should be coming hopefully through our doors at some point. So inevitably between us, we are going to be seeing that number of animals, which gives you a really good sort of instinctive insight, I think, into what's good and what's bad, and the red flags and the green flags. And, you know, you get your puppy patter down pretty good, don't you?
I think you get into a bit of a routine, don't you? It's like anything, really. You get into a little routine of what you go through and everything. We've got a really limited time with new puppy owners, haven't we? You know, normally vet consults only, but if you're lucky, you might get half an hour in some practices, but it can just be 15 minutes or even less if you're, you know, with time that you're spending making notes, etc. So we've really got to pack a lot of information in that short space of time. Yeah, one of the things we're going to talk about in this episode is you know, encouraging people to make contact with their veterinary practice before they come in for that first puppy check. I think that's really important. I mean, one of the other things we're obviously going to talk about in this episode is social media. You know, when it comes to puppy buying, particularly, and there's a huge amount to think about when we're talking about that. Now, I know that you, Kat, like me, are very passionate about educating pet owners. When we're talking about social media, I think it's very easy for us to think about the negatives and the harmful impacts and the problems. But before we kind of go on to that, when we're talking about social media and what it's done for dog ownership and how it's involved in modern dog ownership, I mean, what are the positives?
I think social media has been the great leveller for information, hasn't it? And unfortunately, there's no filter for good information and bad information, but there is a lot of good information out there. And also, most people go into puppy ownership with the best of intentions. And so I think most people do, to some extent, they do some research. And obviously, social media is the place that they go. And there's some creators talking about how to find a new puppy. But I think actually there's probably not enough. But what there are is people talking about puppyhood and sharing their dogs and the pitfalls and the highs and the lows, which I do think is helpful. And also then people can tap into some sort of community after they've got their dog. The challenge is, and you said it would be lovely if people came to the vets before they got their dog, is nobody ever does. Having seen thousands and thousands of puppies already purchased, I can probably count on the fingers of one hand the amount of people that I can genuinely recall have actively contacted vet practice.
Yeah, and my experience is, definitely similar. I can remember one proper sort of pre-purchase full kind of, you know, long 15-minute discussion with someone where they've actively sought out to speak to me about getting a puppy. But why do you think that is? Why do you think that the vets are not a first port of call?
I think we're seen, aren't we, as the health care providers. So when something goes wrong, people come to us. When they need healthcare, they come to us. But when they haven't got a pet, or they're not at that stage, I don't think we are seen as somewhere you would go. And also, I think there's probably a concern that we might charge for that advice. And people are like, well, I can probably Google that and figure it out. I would be exactly the same if I was on the other side of that. There's no judgment coming from me. But actually, a lot of practices don't charge. But even if they don't charge, and I've seen practices advertise the service, people generally don't go, because I think we all kind of think, how hard can it be to buy a puppy? Lots of my friends have got dogs. They've managed it. I've had a dog in the past. There's plenty for sale online. I don't need advice on how to buy a puppy. I can just go shopping like you do for anything. Yeah. I wouldn't ring up Currys and say, I'm thinking of buying a new washing machine. What should I look for? I would go to the store. Yeah. So I think it's just a mindset shift that is completely understandable. But what we want people to do is just take a bit of time in the purchasing process. And then, we'll pick up the reins once they've got the puppy, and hopefully they've made a good decision and we can support them. And if things are starting to go awry, that's when we're going to come in. And sometimes you do think, gosh, I wish you'd spoken to me before you'd made this decision.
There's definitely things that you hear on there that sometimes make your heart sink and think, I just wish a few weeks ago you just asked for just a little bit of simple advice and we really could have helped you. But I think most practices, it's advice that I think a lot of practices are very happy to give out and not charge, especially if you're just calling and speaking to a nurse on reception, or just popping in for an informal chat with someone on the reception desk. Depending on the practice, we're really keen to be involved in that conversation. And I think people used to, I don't know whether, this shift to general purchasing behaviors online and the growth of social media, I think rewind maybe 20 years, even 10 years when I first graduated, I think people would pop into their veterinary practice and say, I'm thinking of getting a Labrador. Do you know any Labrador breeders, or can you point me in the right direction? But I think people go straight to Google because, and like you say, no judgment. That's kind of the way life is now, isn't it? It's just we've got so much information in the palm of our hand that we don't necessarily reach straight to experts. Maybe that's part of the problem.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And back in the day, people would come to us and ask us if we knew any breeders. And, sometimes we did, but sometimes we didn't.
Yeah.
And then a lot of breeders just don't really need vets until they need them. Most of the breeding process happens without us, or it certainly used to happen without us getting involved. Now, maybe we're a little bit more involved, with some breeders choosing to do progesterone testing. There's a little bit more sort of intervention. I mean, obviously, we've seen the rise of dogs which need masses of intervention, like, bulldogs and Frenchies. But those breeders, I find, don't tend to congregate with specific veterinary practices. They're not kind of spread evenly over veterinary practices, because a lot of vets have some side-eye opinions on elective sections and that kind of thing. But there are practices that will do it more readily than others. And so those breeders tend to congregate there.
Yeah.
But most of the time, breeders manage the process by themselves. So, and a lot of puppies don't even go vaccinated these days, which is perfectly fine. Actually, I don't mind if a puppy comes unvaccinated. Sometimes it makes my life a lot easier.
I suppose that's where that can make it tricky, is where they, particularly for the primary course, it's often, they have to have the same manufacturer vaccine, don't they, for the first and the second vaccine. And so depending on where people live, sometimes they might end up traveling huge distances to find a practice that offers the vaccination that they want. So that's the kind of the difficulty occasionally, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So I think when it comes to finding a good breeder, my advice would always be, you just have to have your wits about you and assume that you're going to reject a lot. Be prepared to take a while. Be brave enough to reject puppies and reject breeders. And, never, ever buy a puppy because you feel sorry for it or you want to rescue it from that situation, because that is a humongous red flag that there's going to be issues. And I think that, I don't know whether one thing we could potentially do is appeal to people's sense of sort of, for want of a better phrase, self-preservation or selfishness. Is like, if you get a badly bred dog, you are going to almost certainly have more physical and mental health problems with that dog than if you waited and got a good one. Your life will be harder.
And I mean, with that topic as well, it's emotionally difficult for the owners, isn't it?
Well, precisely. Your life will be harder if you end up buying a backyard puppy farmed imported puppy than if you found a well-bred one. And it's much easier to find an imported one. And they won't be obvious at all because they will hide their origins. But if you get one of those, they're going to be more problematic, and it's not going to be obvious at first. And then eventually, health or mental behavioral problems will come out. The other thing that I find quite difficult when we give people advice on how to responsibly purchase puppies is that the irresponsible breeders are listening to this advice as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're matching it. And I sat once in a lecture from a RSPCA forensic vet. So he did a lot of criminal investigations. And he was saying that, and I assume this still goes on, is breeders will rent a house like an Airbnb. They will have a stooge dog in that house, and these days, because everything's a cocker something or a poodle something, the bitch doesn't have to look like the puppies at all to be plausibly the mother. And then they would just bring litter after litter after litter from farms and from importation, sell them as if they're being sold out of a family home. But they're not. It's all completely pretend. But because there's such a lot of money in it, it's a business expense to rent a house for a few weeks and sell puppies out of it. So now, one of the things I used to do back in the day was the question I always asked was, did you see this puppy with its mother? Always. And one of my first jobs was in the West Midlands. So we were quite close to Wales, where at the time, and I think probably still now, there's quite a lot of puppy farms. So we used to quite regularly have people say, oh no, they met me at a motorway service station, or oh no, I didn't, she was out for a walk, or something like that. It happened a lot. And then I was able to say, right, I think you've bought a puppy farm bred puppy. I suspect you'll have some issues, but at least we're ready for them now. Whereas now I still ask that question. Like you say, you get the puppy patter, and it's just one of the standard questions I asked. And I cannot remember the last time someone said no. So there has been a shift in the way puppies are being sold, but I don't think there's been much of a shift in the way puppies are being bred, because if the numbers are correct, and I suspect they are with the research that the RSPCA and the Dogs Trust and other people do, still the majority of this million puppies a year that we need in the UK to serve the demand, the majority are coming from unregistered breeders of some description or another. Their origins cannot be traced. Now, some of those breeders will be, sort of nice, just one litter, I've got a cockapoo, so is my friend, and it is sort of slightly disorganized, but actually in many ways not too dreadful. I'm not too upset about that kind of breeding at all. But a large proportion will still be imported, backyard bred, off puppy farms, but they're hiding the origins better.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misconception that obviously Lucy's Law came in several years ago. And so I think maybe there's some pet owners or people getting puppies think, oh, well, puppy farms, they're kind of banned now, aren't they? They don't really exist, but they're very much still a big problem, aren't they?
As far as I'm aware, and according to the people who really research these, yes. And I think you can tell, like you say, you see a lot of puppies. And my big sort of tell, and I don't always discuss this with owners because it's an assumption, it is a leap, and, they've got the dog now. You don't generally discuss it. But the ones that are anxious are always suspicious, in my opinion. So the puppy that comes in and sits on the table, greets you, but while you're having the chat with the owner, they just fall asleep or they chill out on the table. Or sometimes, the room is clean, so we let them pootle about in the room. They sort of have a sniff, approach you, and then they just fall asleep in a corner because it's boring when the grown-ups talk. There's a lot of talking in puppy consultations that doesn't involve the dog at all. They're the ones that I'm like, you're a confident, happy puppy who is in a new environment, has checked it out, and now has decided that there's nothing interesting here, so you're going to sleep. And that's brilliant. And I will often point that out to owners and say, look, what a lovely, calm, chilled out dog you've got. Whereas the ones that don't settle, that are still dashing about in the corners or leaping up at their owner, asking for attention and reassurance, bouncing about, not chilling out, those are the ones that for me, I'm like, you've never been in an environment where you felt very safe. You've never had the reassurance of a mother who's calm and confident. You're not used to new environments or new people or changes. You need reassurance from this new caregiver you've bonded with. That is a worry. I won't labour the point with the owner, but I'll often say, oh gosh, it's just like, they're not so settling so well. So, maybe we'll work on confidence. Like you say, with the puppies, we have that 15-minute initial consultation. It is absolutely not the right time at that stage to start labouring the point that there might be an issue here. But the one thing we do have with our puppies in most clinics is that they will then be seen on a regular basis, if not by the vets, by the nursing team, and they can pick up that conversation and run with it. And there are definitely ways that we can help puppies who have had poor starts, but they are unquestionably harder work.
And I think this is one of the reasons to really care about where your puppy actually comes from. Because, I do wonder, obviously with the volume of dogs that we know are coming from less reputable sources, it's a little bit of a case of out of sight, out of mind, I think, for people, isn't it? That they see the puppy, it looks healthy enough. It's okay. And I want this type of puppy. Let's take it home. Buying a puppy from one of those sources where they've not been socialized well, and reputable breeders are very proud to talk about all the good things they do and how they've socialized that puppy in different environments with children, maybe with cats, and that they've been handled lots. And those things are really important, and they set up a puppy for life, don't they? And when we're talking about that, the socialization window is really important. And I guess that's one of the things we can then signpost. That window hasn't completely closed by the time we see the puppy, but a lot of harm is already done by them not being exposed to those different things.
Yes. I think it's fair for them not to see many sort of things outside the home, but you're absolutely right. They should be handled by different people, not troops of people in and out all the time, but they need different humans involved. Exposure to children is really important if possible. Now, not everybody has children on tap. Human children behave very differently to human adults. And so to have that kind of exposure to these different humans is really helpful, and to have been handled by them. And a lot of the time they get that coping ability from the mum as well, who's demonstrating that she's calm and chilled in either different environments or with different people. I mean, at the very least, they need to be allowed out into the garden, if possible, to play on grass so they have different surfaces under their feet. And that's why they should always stay with the litter until 8 weeks old. So they have that socialization between dogs. And we talk a lot about socialization with humans and environments, and that's absolutely really important. But dog to dog behavior is something that actually can only really be taught by dogs to dogs. And so, we see a lot of puppies coming out 6 weeks, sometimes even younger. They've often been told they're 8 weeks old because that's what the breeders know people are looking for. People know they should be 8 weeks old. But if they are separated from the litter too early, they will lose out on a lot of dog socialization and understanding how to communicate and behave around members of their own species. And so when you see a lot of these quite anxious little dogs on walks, the ones that are barking at you on the lead or are really, they don't get on well with other dogs. Often the problems were started before anybody was involved with socialization because they lost out on those early lessons. And so, all of those things are just so important. But for a naive pet owner who buys one dog every decade or less, or they've never bought a dog before, to try to navigate this is so hard because there's no checks or balances, are there? There's nobody checking particularly on these breeders. There's no independent, well, there are some independent, like, for example, the Kennel Club and stuff, but even, there's no infallible system that is rubber stamping breeders as good breeders. There are people who have tried to do that. There's movements going on now trying to do that. But really, it is the Wild West, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely minefield, isn't it? And I think that's why there is so much to think about. And when you're buying a puppy, it's not like purchasing a product. I think that's the issue, isn't it, with the internet and social media, that it has changed puppy buying to be purchasing any product is as simple as that. If I want a puppy, I could probably have one tomorrow, if I really wanted it. But it's a little bit dangerous that it's such an easy decision and process. And it's really one that needs to be given a lot of thought because, dog is not a fridge. You need to put a lot more thought into what type of dog, where you're getting them from, or do they suit your lifestyle? Because it's a living being that's going to be your companion and is going to be in your life for, hopefully a good 10 years or longer.
Precisely.
So obviously we've been talking about emotional health and why it's important to care about the origins of your puppy because of the impact it can have on their happiness and their behavior. I mean, obviously we deal with the medical problems that can come as well from, getting a puppy from a less reputable source. In your experience, what is the relationship between where a puppy comes from and the vet bills that an owner might face?
Well, maybe we should appeal to people's wallets rather than their sense of responsibility and say, if you get a badly bred puppy, it's almost certainly going to cost you more money. Please get it insured. Because we know that. A research paper came out of the Royal Veterinary College 2 weeks ago. They followed the health of a load of puppies that were purchased during the pandemic, and they have shown quite conclusively that ones that were purchased with red flags like under 8 weeks old, no microchip, no mother seen, have in the past 5 years had more health problems and more issues than the ones that were purchased in a more responsible fashion, you are almost certainly going to set yourself up for more health problems. That doesn't mean that, quote unquote, well-bred puppies come with a cast iron guarantee that there won't be an issue. But, if you want to do everything to make your life easier and to have this dog sort of fit in seamlessly rather than being another problem for you to deal with in life, a problem you love, but still we could all do with doing less in our lives. Again, take the time. Don't buy the first one you see. If you can buy it straight away, if you can ring the breeder up and they say, oh, absolutely, come tomorrow, the litter's ready to go now, don't buy it. Don't buy it. It has to take time. You decide you want a dog and you can go and buy one tomorrow. Under no circumstances, buy that dog. It will be a problem. And I think a lot of people are then like, yes, but these dogs do deserve homes. Yes, they do. They do deserve homes. And if you want to be the person who takes on that animal, that's in some ways is fine. But all you're doing is encouraging that breeder to breed more. One thing that I sort of secretly hope will happen is if we get to the stage where we manage to educate people well enough that the breeders can no longer wriggle out of the questions, maybe they'll actually start to breed responsibly. Well, they'll have to. They'll be like, right, well, I'm going to have this bitch in my kitchen and she's going to have a litter and we're going to have to play with these litters and it's going to have to grow up because people want pictures and they want proof that this is where this dog has been born and bred. So I'm actually going to have to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, brilliant. Because one sort of maybe slightly controversial opinion, but one I will stand by, is we euthanize more young dogs for behavioural problems than any other health issue. More people struggle with anxious animals, behavioural issues. They might not be awful, but the amount of people that I speak to who are like, oh, he can never go off the lead because he's bad with other dogs, or I have to walk him at 6 a.m, so there's no other dogs around, or, people will tie their lives in not loving these dogs. And that's wonderful. That's, great. I'm glad you're doing that. However, wouldn't it be better if you didn't do that in the first place? And one thing I worry about is when we talk about responsible breeders, one set of breeders that we're putting off is the just one litter people. And I used to be quite strict about this. I'm like, absolutely not. You either do it properly or you don't do it at all. Having just one litter, terrible idea. And now I'm like, do you know what? If you have got a nice, relatively healthy bitch and you find a nice boyfriend, yes, there's health testing you can do. But you bring that litter up out of a well-behaved, well-mannered, emotionally resilient and sound parents and bring them up in a family home exposed to family environments with children, and you shower them with love, you give them some worm and flea stuff and you pack them off to their new homes when they're ready. That is okay.
I would agree. If they're doing that, they're probably already doing better than, a good 80-90% of of breeders that are, or, sources anyway for puppies that we're seeing.
And then the other thing, which is my slightly controversial opinion, is that I don't think you should have to take a dog back that you've bred. Because I think that's the other thing that puts people off. I'm thinking about breeding our Labrador. She's lovely. She will get all the health testing, but the puppies will be brought and brought up. But the thought of somebody coming to me after 2 years or so and saying, that puppy I bought from you 2 years ago, I can't cope with it anymore. Can you take it back? I'm like, well, I don't really want to actually. I don't really want to sort of randomly have to take on a 2-year-old adult Labrador that doesn't know me from Adam when I've got lots of other stuff going on in my life. And if that is exactly.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? Maybe that has become one of the sort of benchmarks and hallmarks of a good breeder, but maybe it is.
And I think it puts a lot of people off. I think a lot of families with a lot of lovely dogs would have one litter and discover that it's messy and expensive and exhausting, and they'll never do it again. But they will produce 6-8 lovely little dogs. But if I was naive to the whole process, my parents did this when we were young. Back in the day, we had a Labrador. She was quite nice. We had a litter of puppies. We weren't very good at it, but the puppies were adorable creatures. But if they had known that one of the social pressures was that they must take those dogs back at any point during their life, they wouldn't have done it. They just wouldn't have done it because they'd have gone, okay, that's what I have to do. Fine. I will therefore make the responsible decision to not do it because I can't manage that, which is fair. If breeders can manage that, if breeders are willing to do that, that's wonderful. But I think to a certain extent, you have to say, well, this puppy's been bought by an adult who, is responsible human, but, circumstances change. But why should puppy purchaser have the instant get out that they don't have to carry the weight of responsibility of responsibly rehoming a dog if they can no longer manage it?
I guess it's a case of there being some accountability somewhere along the process where things go wrong, but then how does that get built into a system? I suppose it's It's a tricky one, isn't it? But yeah, like you say, we can't just have puppy buyers return, any illness having the opportunity. And like you say, just if the puppy becomes less convenient for them, then thinking that that's a reasonable thing to do. So yeah, that's something that maybe there needs to be more of a wider discussion about. I mean, obviously, we were talking about vet bills as well. Choice of breed is one thing that can affect vet bills hugely, can't it? What are the things that you would want people to know how big an impact it can have on vet bills and insurance premiums? What breed people choose?
Mm-hmm. The flatter the face, the bigger the bill is.
In simple terms, yeah, that's it, isn't it?
If you choose to take on a dog with inherent health issues, then you will have to deal with inherent health issues. That is sort of the long and the short of it, essentially. Yeah. And that's not to say that other dogs don't come with them. Of course they do. Really well-bred Labradors can get very expensive elbow dysplasia that needs CT scans and all sorts of stuff. Every breed carries problems. And this is one of the arguments that you often get from the enthusiasts of the more extreme breeds. It's like every dog has problems. And yes, they do, but very few dogs, in fact, no breeds have problems as consistently and as predictably, as costly as these ones. So yes, absolutely get them insured. Pay attention to the premiums. Compare and contrast. If you do no other research, go on a website, pretend you're insuring a French Bulldog, and then pretend you're insuring a Labrador, and see what the premiums say, because that'll give you a lot of information. Or some companies don't insure them at all now, because they're such massive liabilities.
Or often they'll cut them off at certain ages as well. Some insurance companies, Sharpays, they won't insure them over the age of 6 or so, and that's a bit of a red flag.
Exactly. There's so much information about which particular brachycephalics have a lot of health problems. And again, the RVC and Rowena Packer has done research into this, and they found that a lot of people who purchase them do know. They do know, but they do it anyway. Because A, they think, well, it might not happen to me. And B, they think, well, if it does, I'm a really responsible owner and I'm going to look after this dog and I'm going to get it all the care that it needs. And you think, well, that's, again, wonderful. However, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to do that at all? And I think to some extent that message is filtering down. The French Bulldogs are starting to drop off the popularity list, replaced by our Dachshunds. Yeah. So, and they have their issues with their backs, but I think that drum has been beaten enough that the message is getting through. It's just whether people choose to listen and, really think about it before they take it on.
I think maybe we do need to be encouraging people to think with their wallet more. This shift, certainly I'd much rather people, well, I don't know what you think, I'm from a health perspective, rather people buying Dachshunds and French Bulldogs just because of the range of medical issues and surgical problems that we see in brachycephalics. The flat-faced dogs are huge. And although we do see a lot of problems with spinal issues in the Dachshunds, it's 1 in 4, I think, roughly, that are affected by spinal problems in their lifetime. At least it's just one problem, I suppose. But it's those issues that people, I think, often don't realise. They think, hopefully it's not going to happen to me and my dog. But then when it does happen, it can come as a huge financial shock to hear, particularly with the spinal problems, nowadays, that can be 10K, £10,000 referral to have spinal surgery.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a huge amount of money. And for in this time that we're living in with a cost of living crisis and households' budgets being so stretched, that is unaffordable for a very high proportion of pet owners.
Yes, unless you are insured. And then you might end up with a dog that's paraplegic, so can't walk. And, that requires an enormous amount of care. Or you will choose to euthanize it, which is, in my opinion, quite a reasonable choice to make if you're faced with that kind of decision and your dog has that degree of illness and damage to itself. But that is an emotional nightmare to go through, for people. So you can save yourself a lot of heartbreak and a lot of expense. Potentially, we're never going to stand here and say, you're going to be fine if you buy this dog. But yes, there's lots and lots of considerations that I would love people to think about. I mean, I don't know about you. I live in cockapoo country. The vast majority of puppies I see now are some sort of doodle cross. And I quite like them. I know people can get quite side-eye about them, but I quite like them. I think they make nice little family pets. I think they are suitable for most people's lifestyle. But I think they are underestimated by a lot of people.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think it can be great family pets, but people need to know what they're signing up for, because they're not lapdogs, are they?
Absolutely not. They look like teddy bears, but they're very much not in their attitude to life. And they don't have some of the super bad health problems that our flat-faced or our Dachshunds do. They've all got allergies, loads of sensitivities in those guys. But in general, relatively robust. However, what they do have, a lot of them, is anxiety problems. They can be quite worrywarts. And, some of that I think is the combination, especially the cockapoos of the poodle brain, which is very clever, and the cocker spaniel brain, which is very clever. And they're just massive overthinkers. But I suspect a lot of them are also very poorly bred. So did not have a very good start in life, which then reflect on them for the rest of their lives.
I suppose that's a combination of that super intelligent, high drive breeds that bringing them up in a really barren environment with poor socialization.
Exactly.
And it's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it? I guess it's a combination of that. But I do also think that there are, I do meet people that buy them as easy dogs, and maybe they're not a breed that suits their lifestyle very well. The cockapoos, they do need a lot of stimulation and enrichment and exercise, and they need a job, don't they? They need stuff to do. So I think that's where some of the behavioural issues come from.
They do. And again, I know we're not supposed to like them, but if people say, I want a little fluffy dog that's just kind of calm, I'm like, great, get a Cavapoo or a Pouchon. Take the cocker out of the equation, and you often get a much more chilled out little dog who's sort of much more, well, they're still energetic and lively and fun, but they don't have the edge that the cockapoos tend to, in my experience. But again, this is coming from seeing thousands and thousands of dogs over many years, and watching them grow up and getting to know their families and seeing how they do. And yeah, I think Cavapoos are a bit of a guilty pleasure, actually.
Do they? Because obviously the Cavaliers are very prone to a type of heart disease called mitral valve disease that almost all of them are affected by. I don't know how many studies, or there are really statistics as to how likely the Cavachons are to get that heart problem. I don't know, in your experience, do you see it?
No, I don't think they do. And I have this tiny thought in my head that there might be something, probably out of Vet Compass, showing that they don't. My instinct.
Be good to have that data.
A lot of them aren't old enough yet. You have to be 8 to 10 to get heart murmurs and heart problems. I don't think they do. And again, this is slightly off topic, but I do think that goes to show the hybrid figure that can be bred in within a generation of, just swap some genes around, and actually we can have a really positive impact on health, or take some health problems off the table.
Yeah, I agree. There are definitely some circles on the internet, I think it's coming from maybe the traditional kind of breeding world, people that would say there is no ethical way to breed these poodle crosses. And I definitely disagree with that, but it seems to be quite a commonly held view.
Yeah, I think it very much depends on your definition of an ethical and responsible breeder. And if you ever get the chance to hear a chap called Dan O'Neill speak, anyone listening to this podcast, I definitely would, because he says it really well when he says that everybody will say they're ethical and responsible.
When you say that, he's actually going to be the guest on the next episode of the podcast.
Super. Well, you ask him that question because he talks really well about that. And so he's like, there's no point in asking people, are you responsible and ethical? Because they will say yes. But everybody's definition of what that means is very different. And so the more sort of traditional pedigree breeders will say that the crossbreed breeders are not ethical at all, because they're crossing these breeds and they don't know what they're going to get out of it at the end. And to some extent, that is true. But then you say, well, you're breeding a breed which has got an 80 to 90% incidence of heart disease by the time that dog is 8 years old. Is that ethical and responsible? And so it's a humongous sort of really interesting, but very detailed debate that could go on for days and days and days. But I think my response as a vet who sees a lot of dogs is like, look, just bring that puppy up in a good environment, breed it out of a bitch who is mentally and physically healthy by looking at her. It is the mental side of things. Let her get to 2 or 3 years old, have any health problems emerged, then breed her in a family home, bring them up in a family environment. And I just don't think you can go massively far wrong with that. Yes, there's other things you could do to make it perfect, but do that and you're not going to be far off.
I'd agree, absolutely. Let's talk a bit more about social media, because obviously we both spend a lot of time in the social media realm, interacting with people and seeing everybody's sort of content, putting out our own opinions and educational information. With the internet, when we're talking about trends and like fashions, how much of an impact do you think social media has had on the type of dogs that people are getting?
Oh, I think there's always fashions for dogs, isn't there? And these days, fashions are driven by social media. The corgis were popular because the Queen had them. There's always something that people will look to for inspiration. And certainly, I would say 5 years ago, social media was full of French bulldogs. full of them.
Yeah.
Very common influencer dog, very common celebrity dog. Lady Gaga had them, Made in Chelsea had them. The whole lot of them had one. And now that's really dropped off because I think, the health problems in those breeds are so completely unignorable and public opinion has turned. They're still very popular, but I don't think they're quite as, they are sort of dealt with a bit more cynicism and a bit more practicality online now. I think we're seeing loads and loads. Again, it's the cockapoos and the doodles and the cute fluffy faces. It hugely has a fashion. People gravitate to what they see, don't they? They want familiarity. And that's the other sort of issue with dogs, I think, is that people think, well, I see dogs online. I've got friends who've got dogs. Having a dog is easy. Buying a dog is easy. I had a dog when I was a kid. While I think dogs are wonderful and I think it is great to own one, and I would encourage everybody to seriously consider it, there is more to it than, the surface would suggest.
I think that's one thing that I would say is I think social media in part is one of the things that popularized dog ownership. And now we're kind of, obviously there was lots in the media. There's been lots of talk about the increase in puppy ownership and people getting more pets during the COVID pandemic. Companionship, people were lonely. They wanted, it was something to do, wasn't it, to get a dog. But I think that now maybe social media kind of encourages this idea that everyone can be a dog owner.
Mm-hmm.
That it's something that can enrich everybody's life. Whereas I think maybe go back 20 years and not everybody was a dog person, but now everyone's a dog person, or most people are a dog person. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing.
Well, we're a nation of animal lovers, aren't we? Always have been, always will be. And I agree, lots of people do have dogs.
Obviously there's a huge amount, we'll know the huge benefits that can be brought to people by having a dog. But I think maybe social media sometimes puts it in quite simple
and overly positive terms. Again, we're slightly off topic here, but I went to a really interesting lecture last year by a human psychologist who was speaking at a dog conference. And she said that there's this overwhelming opinion that pets are good for you. They lower your blood pressure, they get you out, they help you socialize, they give you companionship. But she said that actually the data doesn't always suggest that. And pets can be quite a source of anxiety and stress and challenge, especially if they've got behavioral or health problems. It can become quite a burden. Nobody wants to think of an animal that they love as a burden, but it does add an extra layer of complexity. You've got to think about them. They haven't slotted in seamlessly. When the reality doesn't meet expectation, that can be a hugely difficult concept and source of stress for people. And so, much as I would love everybody to have a dog and enjoy a dog, it is difficult. We have a dog now. My husband and I are both vets. We got our first family dog last year. She's just over a year old. We've got 3 children. We've got a lot going on in our lives. And prior to that, we just knew we didn't have time for a dog. We just knew we wouldn't be able to manage it. Now we can manage it, but it's a family effort. The kids are big enough to walk her now and feed her. And if she had been if they'd been younger, she would have been an extra layer of complexity in our lives that actually would have made them harder, not better, for a long time.
I think that's it. We don't have I've got 2 young children, 2 and 4, and I would like a dog, but I really don't feel like I could give the dog everything that I would want to at the moment. And so that's the main reason that I don't have one. Yeah, similar to you, when I was talking about sort of social media popularizing dogs, I think that's a good thing as well. There's so much that could be brought by dog ownership, but I think it's a decision that needs to be given a huge amount of thought, isn't it?
Yes, which brings us back round nicely to really thinking carefully before you buy a puppy and making sure that that decision is not only the right one for you and your family, but also that the puppy is the right one for you and your family. And that decision needs to be made carefully and slowly. And it will take time to find the right dog. 100%. The dog is not going to fall out of the internet and into your lap and be perfect. And if it does, it probably won't be perfect at all.
No, you got to expect it to take months, haven't you? At least, probably, unless you're lucky and find a good breeder that happens to have puppies available. But often the really good breeders that are doing everything well have got long waiting lists, and you're gonna have a wait.
And that's the difficulty, because the one thing I find is a lot of people have given it thought. They have waited until it's the right time. They have got kids and they have said, we shall now get a dog. But what they're not then expecting is it's going to take months to get that dog. And that is what drives people, I think, to potentially less sensible purchases and less well-bred dogs, is because the shock that it takes a while. You can do, I think a lot of people do research. I think, they do look at breeds, they do look at lifestyle, they do ask questions. There's a lot of easily available internet information, but then they've made the decision. We are going to buy a Cavapoo. Brilliant. Where can I get one? Oh, well, there's one available on the internet today, or I'm going to have to now do an equal amount of research. I'm saying that spend an equal amount of time trying to find a well-bred, a good one. But they've already done, they feel like the research is done, the decision is made, the puppy shall appear.
Yeah, they're excited.
Yeah, precisely, exactly. And, our Labrador, we were very fortunate. She's been, we're plugged into a world where we know people who breed dogs. She was actually bred by one of the nurses we work with.
Oh, lovely. I was going to ask where you got her
from. She's amazing. So we knew the litter was coming. We spent a while sort of thinking about it, but essentially we were able to say to our kids, we're getting a dog and she's arriving next week. But that's because we knew we were plugged into a world that allowed us to have the contacts to be able to know somebody who was willing to give us, as soon as we said we were interested, the nurse was really keen for us to have her because she knew what a good fit it would be. Whereas very few people are as fortunate as that. We know how lucky we are.
No, that's the perfect situation, isn't it? Somebody
It's the dream. It is the dream. Yes, absolutely.
So let's loop back to sort of final thoughts and things that we kind of want people to be thinking about when they're coming into the vet practice with their first puppy. What are the questions that you think you wish more people asked you? The things that often get missed, things that people aren't thinking enough about when they bring a puppy in for their first vet consult?
Oh, that's a really good question. I just tell them everything that I think they need to know. They get my puppy patter, which covers feeding and worming and fleas and socializing and training and so they probably go out slightly with their heads reeling a bit.
Yeah.
The one piece of advice I have for people, which sort of answers your question, but also sort of doesn't, is buy a puppy papoose. I say to everybody, we all talk about socializing, but what they really need to do is see the big wide world from a safe space. You don't want to throw them into it and run away. You want them to observe. So I say to everybody, get on Vinted, buy a papoose. Don't buy a new one. There's hundreds of them.
A papoose, is that like a sling?
So like a bag to put the dog in and carry it around. And I say to them, you will feel ridiculous with a puppy, this little head poking out of a bag. But it's a brilliant, brilliant thing to do. And that's my one piece of advice is get a papoose. There's about 50 of them, I think, just circulating on Vinted. You buy it, you use it for a month, you sell it again. Don't get a new one. Buy one from Vinted and get out there. Keep up the relationship with your vet practice. The vet practice will invite you back for checks. Take them up on that. I mean, you've got kids. Having a puppy is like having a child. Things change all the time and stuff happens and you're like, oh my goodness, is this normal? Am I a terrible owner? What's happening now? They appear to have, run away on a walk. What's going on? And your source of constant advice and reassurance.
And so just emotional support as well, because it's exhausting having a baby. It's exhausting having a puppy. And when people that have had dogs before, I find bring the puppy in and they come in for the puppy checks and say, oh God, I forgot how exhausting it is. It's hard work, isn't it, having a puppy?
Oh, I was floored with Maple because I did what I was supposed to do and I slept on the sofa with her next to me and, created that bond and did all the things that I'm supposed to do. And after a fortnight, I was like, I'm sorry, Maple, time's up. I'm going back to bed. It is exhausting and there's something new and then you just think you've got it and they hit the teenage years. And that's a whole other challenge. So the one stable source of independent, knowledgeable advice and support, emotional as well, is practical and emotional. It is the veterinary clinic. So keep up that relationship.
And do reach out. I know we talk about people not contacting their veterinary practice before they get a puppy, but that would be one thing. I still would encourage people to do that. If it's just a phone call, just to speak to one of the nurses, speak to someone on reception, say we're thinking about getting this dog from X, Y, and Z source, and they will know what the red flags are and just give a little bit more support in that process. I think just getting as many people involved as possible is always going to be a positive thing.
Yes, because well-bred puppies are out there. Well-bred puppies of all descriptions. Sizes, shapes, colours, the whole lot. They are out there. You just have to search, and it is worth making that effort, and it is worth walking away from breeders who aren't giving you the right vibes and waiting. A couple of months now when you're looking at a decade or more of pet ownership, is worth it.
Yeah, good things come to those who wait.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us on The Dog's Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us on your podcast platform and share it to others who care about dogs. You can learn more about our work at the Dog Breeding Reform Group and follow us on social media for more tips on finding a healthy puppy and for future episodes. Until next time, thanks for listening and for helping to give dogs a voice.